5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey gang, and welcome back to Alien Protocols, the Advanced Protocols Data Project. We have a really special guest, someone who I've been a big admirer of for quite a while. It's Dr. Jerry Kroth. He's a doctor of psychology and author of over 16 books, including Aliens and Man, a synopsis of facts and beliefs, Omens and Oracles, Collective Psychology in the Nuclear Age, and Extraterrestrial Contacts, the Roswell Foil. Many other works. It's such a pleasure, Doctor. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Tell me how you got first exposed to this topic, and what hooked you in?
Strangely enough, I was never into UFOs. My experience that I wrote about in my book that happened in 1965, I either suppressed or repressed or didn't care anything about. I had a very good buddy. He and I got our doctorates together. He was a Jungian. He was interested in UFOs. I thought he was a bit crazy, but he was my best friend. And he died in a plane crash in 1987, his own plane. And he was interested in the mounds of the Midwest and the pyramids in Chichen Itza. And after, I was really shocked by his death. He was 49. And I decided, sort of like a memorial, I'd take my family and we'd go to Acapulco or to Cancun and see Chichen Itza, pay our respects that way. And I gradually thought maybe he was very interested in Velikovsky. You probably know him. So he and I talked about these subjects, but I never took him that seriously until after his death. And then I started to think, well, in honor of him, why don't you pay a little attention to it? And as I got into it, I thought, my God, there is a whole synthesis between UFOs and the pyramids of Egypt and ancient monuments and rock art. And it's gradually congealed. My first book was called Aliens and Man, a synopsis of facts and beliefs, published by a New York publisher who didn't seem to know what I was talking about, but it was a very decent nonfiction publisher. They didn't promote the book well, but I was kind of proud. It was short. And then as years passed, I started making a few talks and MUFON organizations, MUFON, you know them.
Of course.
I met people who had experiences, and then I realized, oh my God, in 2008, I recalled, I'm reading Philip Roswell's book. You know Philip Roswell?
No, I'm not familiar. The name sounds familiar.
Wait a minute. Maybe I've got
Philip
the name.
Corso.
Oh, yes, I confused. He's at Roswell. His name is Philip Corso.
Yes.
And so I'm reading it in San Diego, and I said, this guy's nuts. I mean, he's making all this shit up. He couldn't have been there. It's impossible. It's so preposterous. And I said, why are you reading this book? And then upon this paragraph that just knocked my socks off. He said, because this is an experience that happened to me when I was teaching the 4th grade in Michigan in 1965. And I completely forgot about it. And here I am in 2008 reading Philip Corso. You've seen this on the video probably. I'll be brief. And he talks about the artifacts and the bodies at Roswell, and they picked up this material that was about 5 inches square, and if you crushed it, it opened up, and if it was the thickness of a piece of aluminum foil, and it had shape memory. I mean, you could not keep it in a shape. It would just always return to a certain, without a crease or anything. You couldn't cut it, you couldn't puncture it. And I said, my God, a little girl brought that to me in 65 when I was teaching school. She said, my daddy said I should show you this. I talked to a few UFO people. They said, find that girl.
Yes, of course. Of course.
You know Anthony Baraglia or Baraglia?
No, I don't.
Oh, he's really a good scholar. And I met him in the course of all this. And he looks up people's names. And I got a guy in Latvia who is a private eye. And I finally found, after I published this book, I found Denise Daly. She was one of the kids in this classroom, and she didn't remember a thing.
Oh,
So
oh,
whoever, there were 19 girls in this class, and I'm still trying to track down. I've tracked down 5, but it's going to be a long journey. Anyway, I
that's amazing.
believe,
So you might have literally held a piece of the Roswell crash.
and I'm a social scientist. I'm objective. I sent letters to 120 scientists, physicists, chemists, material scientists, and I said nothing about Roswell. I said, well, I was holding this strange material. I have never seen it in the last 50 years. What was I holding in 1965? And half of those people that I polled had no idea. He said there was no such material in existence then. Some people said it was nitinol. Some thought it was Kevlar or Mylar. And it was none of those things.
Wow.
None of those things had those properties.
That's amazing. And that's going to be just, it seems like just a mystery for now until you can get some more, corroboration. I mean, you felt it. That was an experience. That was a tangible, physical, real experience. That's amazing.
Yes, and there are some people that I found who actually held that material too. One is an anonymous woman who was connected to Wright Patterson, and there was another woman that Anthony Bragalia and I found, and her uncle brought that material to her in 1977 and she played with it, and he worked at Wright Patterson.
Didn't Jesse Marcel, I think it was Marcel, took it home
Yes,
to his family and they did the same thing and the exact same story about it springing back to the original shape, everything exactly the same.
absolutely. He's one of the original witnesses. His daughter saw my video and contacted me
Wow.
and said, I wanted to continue the dialogue, but she just said, I liked your video a lot. Thank you very much.
You're like, wait.
Yeah, I know.
Where were you teaching at that time?
I taught at Santa Clara University in California for 40 years.
Wow.
And then I retired. I was partially retired when I was writing these books, half time. See, and then I completely quit and devoted myself to this. And it would not be something that would be fashionable in my department.
I'm sure a lot of the topics that your books have covered would not be fashionable. I mean, you've covered assassinations, kidnappings, a lot of really interesting edge stuff.
They're very psychological topics too.
Oh yeah, intense ramifications.
Psychology is not there yet.
No.
No.
Well, when you think about the basic fact that everything is processed through the human brain and there's, just massive layers of psychology and loaded in terms of everything we perceive, we have to look through all that psychology, or we see it through these lenses. If you don't take those things into consideration, I think you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to learn, huge new insights potentially.
Academia has a lot of filters, and it doesn't let probably the majority of the information in. It stays in its little cocoon.
Yeah, parapsychology has been one of those that's, it has the psychology in it, but the para, just prevents it from getting in too deep. But, I guess the things we've learned in the past that were, hypothetical, they're, study after study is bringing up the reality of them, healing, the power of the mind, all sorts of different things.
Your friend Russell Targ, from the Stanford professor who invented the laser, he wrote one of the best books on ESP, and it's not a psychologist. Yeah. I was in Stockholm. I'm sorry, I was in Sweden, but it wasn't Stockholm. It was in the University of Galt, and a professor of psychology invited me to talk about my other book on synchronicity, telepathy, and ESP and those things, not UFOs. And he used to be the president of the American Parapsychology Association. So I gave a talk. Everybody spoke Swedish. I gave my talk in English. They seemed to understand me. I said, thank you for inviting me. How many people do you know have classes in parapsychology? Because you're offering something that I've never seen. And he raised 3 fingers.
Wow.
He said, there are only 3 universities that are legitimate universities that offer courses in parapsychology in the United States.
Wow.
Just gives you an idea of the suppression of this subject matter.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, who I think was one of the first people to get a degree in parapsychology, and you know, his YouTube channel is just filled with, you know, incredible interviews, and you know, his channel just shows how crucial this topic is to explore. And you know, we could be on, and you know, a lot of people think that these things are separate, telepathy and UFOs, and over time they're starting to come together closer and closer. And the bottom line is consciousness, and even physics is now approaching, and all these different topics are kind of coming together around consciousness. And so,
On local connector.
yes. What is your, you know, thoughts on that before we kind of circle back to UFOs? Because
Yeah.
for us and on this channel, we understand, or at least we feel like we have an understanding of that connection of the subconscious to ETs and near-death experiences and shamanism and out-of-body experiences.
Yes.
To us, they kind of all connect to this subconscious layer. But for you, how did you, you know, how do you make that connection yourself? Do you make a connection between those two worlds, or do you keep them separate?
Are you familiar with Dean Radin?
Yes, of course.
Okay, well, he writes a very nice book, and it really dovetailed with my book because I did separate sections on psychic dreams, on synchronicity, on telepathy, on creative possession, about, you know, people who suddenly are possessed and write music that they had no competence in writing. Or, you know, the story of Ramanujan, the
No, I don't.
Indian he was an Indian mathematician. He liked arithmetic, and he prayed to a goddess, and she gave him 3,000 theorems that he wrote down, scribbled down, and made notebook after notebook after notebook of theorems. Ramanujan was one of the most famous mathematicians. The two Cambridge professors discovered him, brought him to Cambridge, and they said, "Where the hell did you get this stuff?" He said, "From God, from the goddess." He said, "Can you prove it?" He didn't have enough math or calculus or differential equations to prove his stuff, but they all turned out to be right. It was like divine revelation. That's a great story. You got to read that. So how do you explain all this stuff? And I think the best explanation is non-locality, quantum entanglement, that the world is not made of discrete little atoms. We live in a field, in an anthropomorphic, I'm sorry, what's the guy's word? Morphic field. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, morphogenic field.
That's it.
I think.
And
yes.
so I think that is the fundamental psychology that explains and unites these phenomena. One of my videos, I quote two women, identical twins. One's living in New York, the other's in Australia. The girl in Australia is driving in the outback, hits a cow, flips her car over, and is an accident. Her sister in New York immediately feels something happened to her sister. She calls her, can't get her because she's in the outback. But she called within a few minutes of the accident. She said, and how could she have known that? That's a psychological example of non-locality. What happens here instantaneously happens over here. It's the same thing with telepathy. You know, you have that connection that's instantaneous. I think that's fundamentally the explanation.
I agree, and I think we're coming to terms with it. Dr. Vernon Neppy has done volumetrics for something he calls the GIML, which is a consciousness field, which permeates all of matter. And he's done the actual physics volumetrics for it. And there's a lot of different names, the Akashic record, all these different things, but somehow there is something that you can tap into when you forget your left brain, when you forget the material world. The signal becomes stronger, that signal to noise ratio, and people can tap into it. And there are places where maybe that, like Skinwalker Ranch is very popular right now, all the weird phenomena they've detected there. There are maybe even places that are like that as well too, where the connection between our world and this other place, this morphic field or morphogenic field or whatever, it's really fascinating. UFOs have a tangible material side, though, and they, recently with military videos and radar confirmation and impeccable witnesses, there is this stark reality that we're confronting, that there is an advanced civilization of some kind, physical. This isn't just a figment of our imaginations, some sort of physical craft visiting us. What are the implications of that for society? I know, of course, they did the Brookings report.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Please, please.
Well,
How do you think society will handle this?
I agree with the Brookings report. I think the aliens do too, because the Brookings report said essentially that if we, this is after Roswell, the CIA conducts a study, what would happen if we told the people that this happened? And they said it would probably create all sorts of psychological disturbances, particularly in the underdeveloped world, where you realize that there is a superior force over you that you have no control over, that is far beyond your own intelligence, and it would create a certain level of panic. Even if the force was benevolent, it would impact religions, it would impact people's beliefs, and the Brookings report basically said, we think it should be censored, just to protect the people against the kinds of unpredictable reactions they might have. The Vatican, by the way, commissioned a study recently under the prior Pope. What would happen if we learned that there were UFOs for real? What would happen to Catholic theology? How would that impact our constituents? So it's not just a small thing. And I think the question is, are the people of the world ready to hear the truth? And I am of the opinion they're not.
Even though that report was done back in the 50s, and we've had so much exposure to aliens, and that there's a new younger generation that has basically lived with the thought of aliens and lived with discovering new races and new species, do you think it'll still be as much of a cross-the-board culture shock nowadays?
Well, yes, I think I'm ambivalent, but I think yes. Certainly, I'd like to know. But in my video, I don't know if you remember this, but George Bush Sr. in his wheelchair.
Yes, yeah, very interesting.
And they said that somebody snuck in a question about UFOs, and his reply was, "We're not ready." I can't remember his exact words. I could look it up online right now, but it was there in my video. But the essence of it was, people are not ready to hear the truth.
And you know what? It's shocking. It's shocking. With religions, you hear from Luis Elizondo, who is the head of the ATIP program, which was the government's acknowledged UFO program under the Department of Defense. And he said himself that his direct boss had religious difficulties with this, that they thought, and multiples of his superiors thought, that this was a satanic based thing. So it seems like, we haven't learned a lot since Copernicus. It used to be we thought everything circled around us, the sun and everything, and now we still think everything circles around us, and religion is still in the way. So in that way, I can see how society would have a big shock, but it's disappointing. I didn't want to hear you say that. I wanted to hear you say,
and I didn't say, but just think, Darwin and the theory of evolution, what's 1859? There are still schools that say, oh no, that's creationism, and we can't teach this. It's a theory, it's satanic. And that's 150 years later, we're still trying to assimilate this truth. And it took, Giuseppe, I forgot his name, he was executed by the Pope for saying what Copernicus said, and it took 400 years before the Vatican to exonerate him. He basically said nothing more than Galileo did. But it took 400 years to forgive him. So if somebody comes up with if President Obama or Trump said, yes, it's true, aliens have landed and we have artifacts, and we've been kidding you or deceiving you for all these years, it would take a century or longer, I think, before people really accustom themselves to this new insight.
But, does it appear to you, appears to me that it's really not the government in control of these events, that these events are happening because of the visitors making them happen. Like you were kind of intimated to before, it seems like they are kind of doing a disclosure, very soft, very slowly. But what if the suppression of this UFO information by our governments puts society at a disadvantage for an event that cannot be suppressed? For 60 years at least, there's a wide belief in the UFO community that the governments have been suppressing this information. And many people like myself believe that if we've been slowly given this information more and more over time, that we will be better prepared to face an incident that perhaps we can't suppress.
Well, it's happening right now, just exactly what you said. Have you noticed that we're getting more government reports about UFOs coming out?
Oh, yeah.
It's
Definitely.
almost like they're slowly feeding us the information. Navy pilots released. We're starting to get things just in the last few years of almost officially sanctioned government reports of UFOs. And
Yeah,
it's like low leak.
Yeah, and it's the highest caliber evidence that we've had. This Nimitz case with multiple radar tracks, multiple witnesses, really great quality footage from the best, sensory equipment in the world, basically the U.S. militaries, and even to the fact where To the Stars company, Tom DeLonge and everyone there, they're waving around a piece of actual metal. We're coming back again to the physical, tangible thing. Maybe it's more of a soft disclosure on the government's part as well. Maybe they sense the need to uptick the rate of, I guess, warming up society to this fact. Do you think?
Right, it's gradual. It's of desensitizing us. But on two things I want to say. If you look at science fiction, we are absolutely obsessed with aliens and Star Wars and horror films and July 4th and Independence Day and all that. It's, if you were to list, one of the most popular movies in America is E.T.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a collective fixation as if we know it exists, but as long as we keep it fictional, we can deal with it in fantasy. It's a dream. It's just a dream. Okay, let's leave it at that. But we have this continuous, repetitive dream that we're having in our films, and that continues. Now, there's another strand of evidence, and in my book, I looked at like 450 witnesses of UFOs, about 250 of whom were scientists.
Wow.
And it's a big book. And I noticed a trend. UFOs try to hide. They try to run away. When they're chased by planes, they disappear. It's as if they do not want to be noticed. They're not show-offs. They're not trying to say, "Ha, we're here." And they're.
What do you make of that? Do you think that's part of their soft disclosure, or?
I think they think that our species is not ready to become conscious of their existence.
What about the fact that something that's trending very much so within the government and within these different projects like To the Stars is the demonization of these visitors, saying that they're a threat, that they're hostile. And from time and time again, if you look at the actual military reports, they do exactly what you just say. Even when confronted with violence, like the Nimitz report, they tried to lock on missiles, and the craft did an active jamming of just the missile system and then turned away and left when pursued. The famous Iran case, the famous Peru case, the Belgium UFOs, time and time again, when confronted by militaries, they seem to turn the other cheek. Do you think this?
Andropov in Russia ordered his planes to shoot, and they were destroyed. So, they were actually, they had to deal with the confrontation. But generally, you're right. In a military confrontation, they jam it, they stop it, and they leave. They have tried to jam Minuteman missiles, though, right?
Yes, Maelstrom and Minot. Do you think that is a hostile act, or do you think they're trying to warn society?
And they're trying to protect us against ourselves. You know, I'm working on a new book now. I haven't disclosed anything about it, but I'm working on crop circles because
Wow.
I think they're really trying to communicate to us. But the question is, these crop circles are so abstract, what's the word I'm thinking of? Obtuse. They're hard to figure out. I mean, why don't you just write in English? Do not kill each other. We don't understand. I'm sure you must understand our language. They're being cryptic for a reason. They think maybe they're communicating with the elites, and the rest of the world will not understand what they're saying.
Hmm.
That's
Well,
one of my pet little theories. I'm not sure of it yet.
there's someone I want to connect you with, Dr. Simeon Hein, who is a crop circle expert who's done a lot of research on them and visited a lot of different locations. Um,
Uh-huh.
he's really great. I'd love for you to just at least meet and share some thoughts there, especially on crop circles. But
Uh-huh.
I think we're bringing up an important point. Their actions over history, over time, seem to be peaceful, with the exception of that Russian case, which I haven't gotten. I've been done a lot of research on that one, and I've had a hard time finding the evidence for them, the craft being violent. But do you think that the demonization of these visitors is a good idea by the government and by these different organizations like ATIP, saying that they're a threat and all these things?
Uh, uh, from a psychological analysis, uh, I don't know. If you say it's all conspiracy theories, then you can deny it and suppress it, say it doesn't exist. As soon as you start saying they're demons, you're acknowledging in a way their existence, aren't you?
Mm.
And I'm not familiar with the literature you're talking about.
Mm.
So I would say that's a pretty dangerous way to go, since I don't think they are demonic at all.
No, and it seems like it's obviously in the best interest of a military contractor or someone who's looking to get contracts with the government on these craft to characterize them as a threat. That way, it's probably easier to get funding than say, they're peaceful. Let's try peaceful communication. What do you
Oh, you
think?
develop weapons to destroy them?
Yeah, well, there are, apparently programs, and people say that they're actively trying to create weapon systems and, traps for UFOs. What do you think of the opposite side of the coin? Trying to actively and scientifically reach out to them and try to communicate.
Well,
You know,
there aren't that many instances where you can show that someone tried to communicate with a UFO. There was a story in Florida with, I think, SETI, or that organization, which had set up lights, and they were flashing lights at UFOs that had appeared in the area, and there was some kind of communication between them. Are you familiar with that?
I am, and I'm familiar with a lot of stories similar to that.
And with the Netherlands stories, uh, there
Hostile.
were there was a couple who saw the triangular craft, and they flashed their lights at it, and it flashed its lights back, and they flashed at their lights, and there was a bit of communication. Then they got scared and they turned around and left. But there was a moment where they were talking to each other. They were saying
Yeah,
hi, hi, yeah, hi. So
mimicry is one of
there
the
are
basic forms.
stories like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are very few of those.
But it's interesting that their stories are all very similar. It starts off with a guy on a boat with a couple other guys, like the Allagash, the famous Allagash incident, where they flashed their flashlight and it flashed and they flashed and it flashed, and the next thing you know, they remember they were on the shore outside of the boat. But
Wow.
time and time again, I've heard that story many times of someone flashing and them flashing back, and it seems like the most fundamental form of communication, mimicry, which you oftentimes see even in human interaction with even like primates and stuff. But do you think that holds promise for a deeper, greater communication, and that is a good idea to pursue that? Is it too early for us to try to do something like that?
I don't know. I do know that from my working with crop circles, they are definitely trying to tell us things about global warming, about things that we're doing to the environment, about methane, about greenhouse gases. They're warning us about some things. They seem to be trying to enlighten us about physics and about six-dimensional space.
And
They
nuclear
seem,
weapons for sure.
yes, and there are some crop circles that talk about that was one crop circle was placed right near an aging nuclear plant in England, and had symbolic references to beryllium and other and cesium and strontium. So it was like, what does that mean? It's like they're trying to say this place is a little bit dangerous, and it could be another Chernobyl for you. So watch out. Those are the things I'm sort of working on now. And there's always, it's like trying to interpret Rorschach tests. Am I projecting? No, I'm making this stuff up, or am I really reading the words of an alien culture that's trying to communicate with us? Always in the back of your head, you think, maybe I'm crazy.
Are they harbingers? Are they acting like harbingers of our future flaws or our current flaws and how they affect the future?
Here comes the big theory now. And this is a chapter in my book on the biology. So my macroscopic vision is this. Get ready.
Okay.
You better light up another cigarette for this.
Okay, hold on a second. All right, I'm ready. I've got the extra coffee ready. Okay, I've got the cigarette. All right, I've got my seatbelt on.
Here it is. Homo sapiens is 196,000 years old. If you look at the Homo skulls, biologically modern man who you could have mated with existed 196,000 years ago. And he had no culture until about 10,000 years ago. What the hell happened? Something happened that human culture explodes in the last 12,000 years. And in that period of time, everything happens. And before that, we're just as dumb as Neanderthal and Homo erectus and Australopithecus. We're use basically stone tools and fire, and that's it. And all of a sudden, we get
writing. Yeah,
writing is 3,500 years old. I mean, all the superior cognitive activity of our species is in the last 6th percentile of our existence on this planet. What the hell caused that? And the theory is intervention. Somebody tweaked our genome and made us smart. And all of a sudden, we have a few genes that increased cognitive capacity. Actually, Neanderthal's brain is larger than our brain. So we got smart. And I believe that the aliens have been nurturing our development. And they have intervened. And we have certain religions that talk about God the Father, who's in heaven. Hallowed be his name. And 30% of the planet believes that. Okay, so all of our religions, 84% of the population of this planet believes there is some kind of an entity that gave birth to us and nurtured us and is interested in our development. Guess what? I think it's true.
Wow, that's frightening. It's really frightening information.
It's not frightening. It's wonderful. We're the children of the gods.
It's, in your video, you pointed out something really important to point out in terms of, because this 12,000 year period and the explosion of this intellect, human beings were very different before then. And a lot of people would say, oh, it was because the ice age came all the way down and there was a funnel, a biological funnel. But you show in the video how the ice age left plenty of green space all over the world.
I'm so glad you watched.
And, and that there was another possibility that it was because the population got so high that there was a greater interaction and a greater need for this communication, and that might have spurned this evolutionary thing in such a short period of time. But that seems to fall really short when you really kind of think about it, when you break it down. And you're left.
That is the standard mainstream point of view, the one you just said.
That's the standard, mainstream science to explain it. But it really falls short to most people when you just look at the facts, that there weren't, the population was a lot less than it is now. And maybe now you could see how that would have an effect, or it could even have the opposite effect, the dumbing down of society, because now that you've got more people who can take the weight off you and all of that. It's fascinating. If we really found out that we are being visited by the same people who created us, and that the universe doesn't revolve around our planet, the universe revolves around maybe another race that goes around doing this or something, that is cataclysmic stuff. You know, we're not just approaching a whole new paradigm in terms of social understanding, if this is true, that we have a universe filled with other species, but we're also confronting this new age of physics where all this new science is going to be hitting us. These technologies that these craft display can transform society big time. So we're talking about two levels even of transformation. Do you think just the technology side alone, humanity can handle that? Because this stuff is going to be used for hypersonic, invisible weapons, and all that stuff, all this technology. Do you think humanity can handle this?
Well, I think our progenitors, if we're going to stick with my really crazy model here, that
That's not crazy.
have been are basically our parents, and they're watching us grow and develop, and they drop down a few comments when we're getting a little out of hand. You know, the what are they? The Foo Fighters in World War II?
Yep, Foo Fighters. Yep.
Well, I mean, they obviously know, and we were starting to blow off nuclear weapons in the 40s, and Roswell happens. They're really paying attention to our self-destructive tendencies. So they're monitoring our behavior, I think, and they're making appropriate interventions. There are not many. They didn't close Auschwitz, did they? But it was a short war, and I mean, it was, in terms of being what, 5 years long, 6 years long.
Yeah.
I think they're watching. In the Bible, they talk about the watchers, you know, and I think they're watching us. They're not intervening in a direct manipulative way, and they're kind of encouraging our technological development. But you're right. Here we go with hypersonic weapons. And
well, you know, you bring up such an incredible point. If they gave us this intelligence, then they would see a sense of responsibility about things like nuclear weapons, because they gave us this intelligence that could have led to these nuclear weapons and led to all this stuff. It would make sense. That's why they're visiting the nuclear bases. That's why they're visiting the militaries. That's why they're giving these messages to experiencers. Just like, you know, our Father in heaven, our Father would want their children not to be violent, not to kill each other.
exactly.
You know, it leaves, you'd have to ask yourself, why would an extraterrestrial care so intimately, so maternally or paternally over this species of humans on this planet? Why would a species care so much to be so involved unless they were involved in a deeper level? And, you know, your belief that they changed us would give them that kind of parental reason. Because you would think of a praying mantis creature from another galaxy wouldn't maybe care that much about ongoing interaction.
Oh yes, okay. That's our fictional story about praying mantises, you know, in Independence Day. No, I don't think our aliens are like that at all. I think Jesus Christ was, after all, he's half man and half God, right? He's a hybrid.
Yes, a hybrid. Wow.
Mary was impregnated by an alien, and there was a skull, a mummy discovered in Peru a few months ago with a large head and strange eyes. The Stanford professors examined, and they found unusual mutations in the DNA. So I think we're the progeny of an alien civilization that is watching over us, nurturing us, and recognizing that they built their creature on an animal. You know, Homo erectus was the platform that they built it on, and he was kind of violent and vicious and territorial, and this innate human aggressiveness has to be somehow integrated or tamed. And so the Sphinx is the largest sculpture on Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a city block wide. It's a picture of a human on the body of a lion. And I think the meaning is we've put a divine intellect on a beast.
Wow.
And that's who you are. And it's not an easy job integrating all that stuff.
Wow, this is really, really intense. I didn't think this conversation would go into such an intense area and it's such a kind of, it really makes sense. It feels right. It justifies why they would be so intimately involved with us. Why would they be so watching over us, so much hovering over us, literally like a parent?
Well, we reached the point that we can destroy ourselves in the last, since since the mid-50s, we've created enough violence that we could destroy this entire planet. And in fact, we are destroying it with global warming. So
wow.
It's to the point that if I was an alien, I'd say, when are we going to go down there and change this stuff? Because it's really getting bad down there.
Wow. I wish, I hoped that you would have said, what, humanity can take this. And in the Brookings report, they said one optimistic thing that I kind of latched onto. And back in the 50s, that there is a possibility that this could unite humanity as nothing else had previously. And that's something that Ronald Reagan mentioned the same thing, right?
That's right.
And do you think that it would have as much of a chance to unite us as divide us?
Well, Ronald Reagan implied it was a negative force, an enemy against us, and we would unite against them. It would be a solidarity against these parasites that were coming to get us. But what was the question? I lost it.
No, it's just an exploration. Do you think that there will be a segment of society that will worship them as gods?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. They will wipe away traditional gods and
you know the story of John Frum, don't you?
Oh yes, the island, and they call him John Frum, and he landed on a biplane, and what was the name of the islands? It wasn't the Canary Islands.
Caroline Islands. But so they deified him, and his name was John, and he said, "I'm probably from California or from Missouri." But they called him John Frum, and he's a god, and he had a Piper Cub. And they have models of the Piper Cub, so they deified. They turned him into God, and he brought them Agatha Christie novels and chocolate bars, and
there's a prophecy he'll return again one day, right, and bring more goodies.
It's the paradigm of most religions. The second coming of Jesus, the Mahdi in Islam is the second coming of the Savior. He's coming for us, and he's got Hershey bars.
Well, it sure seems like it really makes sense, and you've really kind of pulled this whole thing together with explaining why they're so paternal, and if they really did mess with our genetics in that 12,000 year period, it really keenly explains why they're so interested in us, as opposed to an alien species. It makes a lot of sense.
However, may I add one thing?
Please.
If I was the supreme head of the alien that lives on the other side of the moon. You've read Jim Mars's book, Alien Agenda?
No, I haven't.
He's a great investigative journalist, wrote about the Kennedy assassination, and all of a sudden he writes about aliens. And he discovered a lot of documents in the government. Anyway, it's a long book. If I was one of those folks, I would say, planet Earth is reaching a critical threshold where if the CO2 emissions continue, we're getting to a point of irreversibility,
No turning back.
No turning back. So it's time for an intervention. If we're going to save our progeny that we've created down here, they're out of control. Their population is out of control. Their greenhouse gases are out of control, and we have to do something. It's not their aggressiveness, it's their population and their lack of consciousness. We're going to have to tell them how to do fusion. So they'll get on fossil. or we're going to have to give them some secrets so that they can advance to stop this shit.
You know, we're in the middle of a mass bioextinction, and, you know,
Yes,
pound for pound in the universe, you know, the most rarest thing is not diamonds or gold, it's life. And I'm sure that in advanced civilizations prize data. They prize information more than diamonds or gold because they could get that in other places in the universe. And they would think of life as a very dense form of data. And they would treasure life because not only of, you know, its rarity, but also because of its data inherent in it. And you would think that, you know, when we push ourselves to the brink of extinction as we are, and, you know, species are falling off this planet constantly, that their care and concern would reach a point where hopefully, well, maybe they're doing it. Maybe these constant appearances are leading up to a bigger appearance. And maybe, you know, humanity, we could be at our, you know, peak period right now of humanity, where we're enjoying the best luxuries, and that maybe in a few more generations that, you know, those dominoes are going to start falling. That point of no return that you were talking about might be here. Do you think it's more dangerous for society to face these extinctions and natural calamities that are going to happen, or to, you know, open up the possibilities for a bigger universe and maybe see if we can get some help? Do you think that's a rational thought from the extraterrestrials? Do you think which is more dangerous, ourselves or them?
Okay. Last comment. Jesus on the cross, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? Right? So he's looking up to his heavenly Father and saying, you know, where the hell are you? I've been on this cross now for 3 hours and it's fucking painful. So that's his human nature. Now, if you were a resident of Auschwitz in 1944, you might have looked up to the heavens and said, Father, where art thou? Why hast thou forsaken me? How could all of these innocent people, women and children, mothers and fathers, be gassed to death? Where is God? Where is our salvation? So to bring it up to now, we're getting to a point in a few years, I would say, where Greenland and the ice cap in Antarctica is the seriousness of global warming is getting to such an extent that we have to ask the same question. And either there aren't any aliens who are going to come to our aid, as there weren't in 1944 for that guy in Auschwitz, or I think it's coming to a head. I think it's coming to a threshold, and that something is about to break. Could be in the next 5 to 10 years, but I don't think humanity can go 10 more years doing the same shit they're doing without really catastrophic consequences on extinctions, including our own.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And something's happening. I think everyone feels it. We feel the convergence of all the different negative possibilities, and those growing every day, all these different terrible things that can happen, and self-created and external, and that there needs to be some sort of big change. And it's fascinating. And with people like you who are psychologists who bring a deeper understanding of human nature, it brings a sense of I don't know, solace to know that maybe society can handle this. Maybe society can, you know, put the pieces together for a better future. Are you hopeful? Are you hopeful? Yes. Humans as well as you do?
I am. I wrote a book that no one ever read, published by a very prestigious publisher. I think they sold 80 copies. It's called The Psychic Immune System. And the basic idea is that we have survived every major Holocaust, and the total number of Holocausts in the last 2,000 years have averaged no more than about 37 years. Genghis Khan, 1 generation. World War II, 6 years. World War I, a few years. Something puts an end to this shit. And whatever that is, it is love, it is peace, it is positivity, it is something in the human condition, like our immune system, that attacks this disease and eradicates it from the body of human civilization. So I think there is such a system, and I think that that these crises will end. But when you think consciously, you say, I don't see how the hell this. I don't see Donald Trump doing it. you know. But
well, that's great. You leave us with a sense of hope that there's something innate
on Trump. No,
not on Trump, but in human nature, that, we see a child, the goodness in a child, and how a child knows right for wrong. There's something innate in humanity that knows good.
Yes.
And
yes,
that knows that good is good and that wrong is wrong, and that may be our salvation ultimately. Dr. Kroth, I could explore so many different topics with you, and we just greatly appreciate your time. And is there, if anyone wants to check you out, where should they check out information on you?
They should go to my website. It's called Collective Psych. One word, collectivepsych.com. PSYCHE.
Great.
Wait a minute. Collective Psyche. I forgot it.
It's collectivepsyche.com.
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
And your YouTube channel, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah. You can always go to YouTube and put in Kroth, and you'll find your way.
And you'll see videos from the presidential assassination of JFK to the Lindbergh baby, right?
That's right.
And
but your name is Buddy, right?
Correct.
I would like to thank you. This is probably the most intelligent interview I have had in 5 years. You really ask good questions.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Kroth. That's such a pleasure. I thought that I was making not a lot of sense at points, but I'm glad you think so. You're the professional.
Okie doke.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you. Take care, buddy.